I've been asked a lot of questions about vaping in the workplace. As you probably know, vaping is the new phenomenon that smokers have turned to in an effort to be able to give up on smoking, and it's basically the use of e-cigarettes which supply them with a certain amount of nicotine, but it's meant to be a good way of weaning yourself off smoking. And there have been some concerns by both employers and employees as to how to manage this new social phenomenon. Under the Health Act 2006, there are certain measures in place to protect people from the dangers of imbibing secondhand smoke, but that actually doesn't cover vaping, and so that's where the difficulties have arisen. The place that this all starts is with a decision to be made by both the employer and the employee, and when I speak about that, what I mean is on a broad consultative level. So, for example, I'm a foundation governor of a secondary school, and there have been discussions as regards vaping and how to handle it, and what we've really had to analyse is what exactly the policies and procedures are that need to be put in place. And I certainly know that that's a discussion that's probably being repeated throughout secondary schools and other organisations throughout the nation. And so I think a good place to start is how you feel about vaping and what it is, if you're the employee who's doing it, what it is that it does for you, what benefits you gain, and the impact it might have at work. And on the other hand, if you're the employer, you need to be thinking about what your concerns are about vaping, how it might impact the other staff, and what effect it has on productivity, for example. So I think the foundational level is figuring out quite where you're going to be going with that, and that is a process of consultation involving management and staff equally. Now, some things you ought to be bearing in mind if you're the employer. If you were to decide that vaping is to be banned within the workplace, might you come across as being very unsupportive of people who are trying desperately to stop smoking? Another thing that you could think about is whether that would mean that people who are trying to come off smoking would then have to take more frequent breaks in order to satisfy their cravings in some way by going outside to the park or whatever. If you're the employee, you're equally going to be thinking, how do I approach this? This is a new atmosphere of smoking versus vaping. There's a lot of discussion that hasn't yet taken place. The other side of things, if you're an employer, is to be thinking about the people who don't smoke and who don't vape, how they're feeling, their discomfort, whether there are long-term problems with vaping, because it's not something that's guaranteed as 100% safe. There are also the issues of ensuring that you're fair to all of your staff, so that those who are taking smoking breaks or vaping breaks are treated the same way as people who don't smoke and don't vape but may not require so many breaks from work. So there are quite a few issues to be thrashed out before you can decide on your policy. And once you've got to the point of deciding on the policy, you next need to think about what you're going to put in it. And so there are some things that I would say are key issues that you need to be thinking about. For example, as an employer, you don't have a responsibility to create a smoking shelter. So if staff smoke, you don't have a responsibility to say this is the designated area for doing it. But if you do decide that you've got a smoking area, what are you going to do for the people who vape? And how are you going to handle this? Because obviously, if you're vaping, you don't want to be near a smoker because it then drags you back into the addiction. So that's a kind of difficult course for the employer to navigate because they're then becoming almost like a peacekeeper. So what are you going to put in place in terms of accommodations for people who vape? Ensuring that the breaks are fairly allocated. Are you going to make it a disciplinary offence for people to vape in a prohibited area? What are the prohibited areas going to be? And are you also going to make it an offence or a disciplinary offence if vapers take longer periods to have a break or to vape than people who are just going off to have a cup of coffee? And how are you going to now be monitoring these breaks? So these are some of the things that you need to be thinking about. And it's quite a tricky area and it's a fast developing one. So if you do need any assistance with this, please feel free to give Shensmith barristers a call, and we'll happily give you a free consultation to help you with the initial stages, and hopefully we'll work together in future to be able to create other policies as things develop in employment law.